With Figuarts changing their standard for design, it comes into question whether or not it's worth getting rid of your old ones and upgrading to the new ones. Now, in some cases, that seems like a pretty obvious thing. Figures like Decade, Kuuga, Kabuto, the earlier Figuarts definitely came with some flaws that needed to be addressed. But what about ones that seem to have things going together by then? The ones that seem to be pretty well made, and that's what we're discussing today. This is SH Figuarts Kuuga Ultimate form. This is the original release, not the renewal, even though it's not called renewal. We just call it renewal because it's easier than saying the Japanese name. Anyway, the 2.0 Figuarts have their own Ultimate Kuuga now, and we're going to see if it's worth replacing this one. As we can see, cast almost entirely in black plastic, though not completely black. It's an almost black. It's kind of black. It just has a slight downtone to it that lets it stand out a little bit better than just, standard flat black, and lets the details come out. It makes it look more like the actual suit, is probably the best way of putting it. It's a little bit of a matte finish. Still has some shine to it. Obviously it has some shine to it. You can see the lights. And yeah, lots of lavish gold paint adorning it all throughout. The thing about Figuart reviews, we can start with a look at the head. And this, of course, definitely strikes you, Kuuga. I love the head design on this. It's very retro, very classic. I still love the segmented eyes, which is the traditional element to retain from the original bug motifs of Kamen Rider. Unless you're based on a video game, in which case, screw it, anime eyes. But I do like the segmented eye look. I like the layered look that they come with in a Figuart. Smooth on the outside, all bumpy and rigidy on the inside. Very, very nice. And this is one of those figures where we'll actually see why it's shaped like that. But beyond that, very, very sharp detailing all the way across this. Even if Figuarts are technically better now with the new standards, they still didn't slouch. Like, there's still a lot of intricate detail going on here, and it still looks like such a good figure. As we can see, very sharp designs, as is typical with Ultimate Kuuga. Very, very pointy shoulder pauldrons directing outward. Detail I really like. And you'll also note a lot of little spiky bits along his forearms and along the sides of his shins. Important thing to note here is that while, yes, these are very sharp, they do have a flex to them. It's an attached piece of softer plastic, and that keeps these from breaking. That's a really smart design element, and the same is true down here. You know where I could really use this design element? Up here, in the horns, which are still perfectly hard plastic. I have a new Deno Figuart with a broken horn that I'm just kind of stuck with, because who's going to buy a broken Figuart? But yeah, that really would have come in handy, because that would have kept it from breaking. So it's at least a smart design element here on the broader areas of the toy that are more prone to such damage from falls and whatnot that would happen to it. Let's go. Let's see. We'll take a look at the colors, I guess, because you wouldn't think he'd be a colorful guy, but hey, he's got his moments. The gold is brilliant. I keep saying in videos that Bandai just has this particular shade of gold paint that it's the right amount of metallic element to it. It's just the right shine and hue. Though on this figure, it seems to pop better along areas like his forearms, his horns, his knees. The thin lines don't quite have the same shimmer just because it's a thinner section, and they come off looking a little bit flatter. But when you get down to those areas where it just gets to coat the whole thing, it does look absolutely lavish and does have this actual gold appearance to it. And those trimmings go all the way through the toy as he needs, of course, down to the anklets, all the way lining up. I love the lining detail in general across this guy. You will also notice a very pale blue lining him. It's kind of a cobalt blue. It's kind of grayish. It does. It's a subdued color, and it's meant just to bring out some of the extra molded details on the suit. And that's a really nice thing, as it would just kind of get muddled up otherwise. Here, it gives him a little bit more pop and makes those details stand out just enough. to really make them noticeable. That's a very subtle trick, and definitely one that applies well here. One area where they did kind of skimp on the paint, unfortunately, is the belt itself. You can see the translucent core with some molding in the back, and that's a nice little touch. Not true on the sides, and you notice all the little buttons from the Kuuga belt are molded in. None of them actually have the paint. This is an unfortunate little bit, and one of the few areas where the Figuarts definitely needed some kind of updating. It's not an extreme detail, but it is a little bit upsetting if you really focus on the belts as a major Kamen Rider detail. Other details weren't done so badly, though. You can see on the back of the fist, you do have the emblem for Ultimate Kuuga. It's very nicely painted on, tampographed, so it looks nice and clean. So you do have that. It's in the matching gold, matches very well. And a little bits here and there, the little black shining through, the little spots there, just around some of the heavy areas of gold. Nice that those are included. So yeah, it's really just the belt that comes up short paint-wise. Though this is, to be fair, Ultimate Kuuga, and he's not the most colorful, or it's not the design that needs the most paint in the world. So it definitely does have, doesn't need a whole lot. Let's go ahead for the articulation. Ball joint at the neck works really well. There's one at the top too. It doesn't quite have nearly as much room, but it's there if you need it. The shoulders do have an inner ball joint as well as a hinge to the outward, and you also have these shoulder guards, which you'll notice have a bit of a hover to them. You can move them upward. That gives you plenty of extra shoulder motion. Reveals a little bit of extra detail in there. See, you have a bicep rotation as well as an elbow. It's double jointed, but doesn't quite bend enough to give you a natural motion. The top of that double hinge on Figuarts always tends to be just a little bit too stiff for that. You do have exposed joints here at the wrist, which allow the wrist to rotate both at the wrist itself and the base of the hand, as well as hinge, which gives you a great range of motion. Very, very nicely done there. Lets you bend this hand in every which way you could want it to be bent. And it does tend to make it stick out from the forearm a little bit, so it has a little bit of a floaty look to it, but that's about the only downside to that. You have a waist joint, which allows his torso to rock back and forth and twist a little bit. It also gives his waist rotation a bit more of a natural look. That way it doesn't just look like he's contorting in one particular spot. Looks like his spine is actually going with him a little bit. The hips are one of the big areas where the Figuart has changed in design, so we'll go ahead and demonstrate the classic kind of Figuart articulation, where you have this inner stem that can hinge into different positions in order to increase the range that his hips can traverse. And this does give you a little bit more range, a little bit more spread than some of the Figuarts that I've seen in the renewal style, but it also kind of breaks the look a lot, and yeah, that does look a little bit weird. Of course, that's more of an aesthetic thing. It's function over form in this case, I would say. But it depends. On this kind of design, I think you're going to break it no matter what because of all the lines going through. It's a plain black pant, plain black tights character like Agito or the normal Kuuga. I think you're fine either way. You give a double jointed knee, which works outstanding on him. Then you get down to the ankle, which is one of the best parts of a Figuart, which has that rotation. It has a ankle tilt both ways. You have a tilt going backwards and forwards, and you also have a bend at the toes. Loads of articulation. Look, bends and curves everywhere. Everything twists and turns. This guy, as you would expect for a Figuart, absolutely loaded with articulation. He can do pretty much anything you need him to do, unless that requires accessory, because he does not have a whole lot of those, at least not the swords and shields and what you would expect out of a Kamen Rider figure. No, he does have some extra parts, though. So I'm going to start by ripping his face off. This is what I normally do, but hey, we'll just do it here. Why not? He looks kind of like a fencer now, doesn't he? He doesn't come with a sword, though. We've noted this. He comes with an extra face. And what the extra face does is change the eye color from red to black. Because this was, of course, the evil, dark Kuuga that threatened to take over. Now, here's the thing. You never really... Spoiler alert. Sorry for spoiling a series that's like over 15 years old. You never really saw this in Kuuga. Like, this was seen in flashbacks and dream sequences and would-be, maybe kind of situations. It was really only in Decade did you see Black-Eyed Kuuga a lot. And Ultimate Black-Eyed Kuuga even rarer than that. So this was just such... this. You remember when they did that as a separate figure art? Like, when the Rising Ultimate one was a separate figure just because it had black eyes? It was so stupid. Look. So much easier. Just, it's 4 tiny little pegs. Pop off, pop on, eye color switch. They do it with swappable heads now, which I guess is a little bit less prone to breaking, as these are tiny little pegs. But it's either way, much smarter design now. And besides that, what you have are hands, and just absolute tons of hands, and very subtle hands, honestly. Okay, so I'll get him out of the way so the camera will be able to focus on these. You have a set of hands for gripping. And this is apparently, I assume, to hold weapons from other Kuuga releases, as Ultimate Kuuga supposedly could use the Rising weapons. But hey, if you've ever seen Ultimate Kuuga in action, you realize he doesn't need a weapon, but he has the hands just in case you want him to have them. He also has these, which are these open, kind of angry hands. But you also have a set of these, which are slightly differently shaped angry hands. Can you tell the difference? It's really kind of hard. It's down to just a few finger bends. It's a very subtle difference, but hey, it's there if you want it. You also have a set of hands for this 2-finger little point thing. It's a little bit Kamen Rider double. So good for posing, good for indicating, good for standoffs with other figures if you should happen to want him to stand off with somebody. And of course, the classic. You have the thumbs up. The only real hand you need when it comes to Kuuga. In fact, I've owned Kuuga figures where that's literally the only extra hand they come with. This means you have a total of 11 hands for this toy along with the fists themselves. So the way I tend to describe how to do this is even pressure, pulling in both directions at the same time. I kind of put my thumbs together and just kind of push my thumbs together to pull the components out. See, it's a very thin piece that ball joint is attached to, so you definitely want to be a little bit careful, but as long as you keep the pressure even, you should be good. So that in general is SH Figuarts Ultimate Kuuga in all of his glory. Now, as I said, many of the renewal Figuarts do upgrade quite a few things, and on older figures, the original Figuarts, that's very necessary. Ultimate Kuuga here stands up pretty well. Your main differences are going to be the paint level on the belt, the stylings of the accessories, and more importantly, the sculpting itself. As the sculpt on this one, the only real flaw to him is that it is quite flat. There's much more of a look of armored layering to the new one that's more accurate to the original design. That said, this is still an excellent looking figure, still has pretty much everything I would need out of an Ultimate Kuuga. So if you're thinking about upgrading, or if you happen to be picking up somebody else's Kuuga because they upgraded, this still is not a bad one at all. And, I don't know, maybe upgrades aren't quite worth it to you, because this guy, I think he still stands up pretty well.